Elijah, a 14-year-old boy, trudges home through the dimly lit streets of his neighborhood. The weight of his day hangs heavy on his shoulders, working late at a small, underfunded grocery store to help his sick mother and younger siblings survive. The neighborhood is run down, with buildings that have seen better days, and streets that seem to breathe a sense of hardship into everyone who walks them. Elijah's family has always struggled, but his mother's illness has made things worse, and the burden weighs heavily on him. Despite all the challenges life has thrown his way, Elijah has always kept a kind heart, always looking out for others who may be suffering, despite having little himself. But his hope for a better life seems like an impossible dream, especially when he faces the constant prejudice and discrimination that his neighborhood is notorious for. There's a sense of hopelessness that clings to his every step as he walks home in the dark, just trying to make it to the next day. His life has always been one of survival, just getting by in a world that seems to have forgotten people like him. As Elijah walks home one evening, deep in thought about his family's struggles, he hears a faint cry for help. His heart skips a beat as he scans the street, searching for the source. The voice is weak, but it's unmistakable. Someone is in trouble. He instinctively follows the sound down an alley where the shadows grow darker and the air feels thicker with uncertainty. There, lying on the cold ground, is a pregnant woman, struggling to breathe. Blood stains her clothes, and she seems to have been hurt. Elijah's first instinct is to help her, despite knowing little about who she is. But as he kneels beside her, trying to offer assistance, he notices something that leaves him frozen for a moment. The woman is none other than Judge Rebecca Whitmore, a well-known figure in the city, famous for her tough stance on crime, especially against impoverished youth like Elijah. Judge Whitmore, known for sentencing many young people from neighborhoods like his to harsh punishments, was someone Elijah had heard about for years. She was feared, respected by some, and despised by others. But she had always been a distant figure in his life, someone whose decisions never really impacted him personally, until now. Elijah's first thought is to run, to avoid getting involved in something that could put him in more danger. After all, he's seen what happens when people like him get involved in situations with powerful figures like Judge Whitmore. But as he looks at her pale face and hears her faint gasps for air, something inside him shifts. Despite the prejudice she may have held in the courtroom, she is still a human being, and he can't bring himself to leave her to suffer alone. Without a second thought, Elijah gathers all his strength and gently lifts her, trying to move her away from the alley. But he knows he can't carry her for long. He's too small, too weak. He looks around desperately, his mind racing to find help, but there's no one around. It's just him and the injured woman in the quiet darkness of the alley. Elijah's heart pounds in his chest as he makes the split-second decision to carry her home, hoping his mother can help, even though he knows there's little she can do for such a severe injury. But he refuses to abandon her. Elijah's heart races as he carefully lifts the injured woman, Judge Rebecca Whitmore, onto his back. The rain has started to fall in heavy sheets, and the streets grow slick beneath his feet. Each step feels like an impossible challenge, his muscles aching from the weight of the woman on his back, but he pushes forward. He has no other choice. The woman is unconscious, and he can't leave her there alone in an alley, vulnerable to more harm, as Elijah trudges through the rain, The city seems to grow more and more distant. The familiar streets he's walked down 1,000 times now feel like a foreign place, an obstacle standing between him and a chance to do what he knows is right. His breath comes in ragged bursts, but he refuses to slow down. He can feel the weight of her body on his back, but he also feels a growing determination. He can't let her down. The small, cramped apartment he calls home comes into view. It's a humble space, filled with the clutter of a family barely making ends meet. His mother, her illness evident in the way she moves slowly around the house, has worked tirelessly to provide for him and his younger siblings. But despite their hardships, they have always found a way to survive, to make it through. When Elijah bursts through the door, his mother, Nana Ruth, looks up in surprise. Her expression shifts to concern as she takes in the sight of the woman Elijah carries, blood-stained and barely conscious. "Who is that?" Nana Ruth asks, her voice strained with worry. Elijah, struggling to catch his breath, quickly explains. "She's hurt, Mama. She's the judge from the court. I found her in the alley." His voice trembles slightly, still in shock from the events that just unfolded. Nana Ruth, without hesitation, rushes to help him. Despite her own exhaustion and health concerns, she immediately takes charge, guiding Elijah to place the woman on the couch. Together, they get her settled, covering her with a warm blanket, as they try to stop the bleeding and assess the damage. Elijah's younger siblings are already huddled in the corner of the room, wide-eyed and unsure of what's happening. As Judge Rebecca slowly regains consciousness, she winces in pain and looks around, disoriented. Her eyes lock onto Elijah, but there is no immediate recognition. She is clearly confused and frightened. After all, Elijah had just saved her life. And now, here she was, alone with strangers in a cramped apartment. The uncertainty in her eyes is palpable, and for the first time in what seems like forever, she finds herself powerless. "Where am I?" she asks hoarsely, her voice shaky. "Who are you?" Elijah hesitates for a moment, then responds, his voice steady, though tinged with worry. "You're safe now. My name's Elijah, and this is my mom, Nana Ruth. We're just helping you. You were hurt, and we couldn't leave you there." Rebecca tries to sit up, but the pain makes her gasp. She leans back against the cushions, her hand pressed to her side. Despite the vulnerability she now feels, a part of her still carries the walls she's built from years of ruling in court, judging others without ever truly understanding the people she's affected. The irony of being at the mercy of strangers, especially a boy from the very neighborhood she had often sentenced with harshness, isn't lost on her. As the night stretches on, Rebecca listens silently while Elijah and his mother talk. They speak about their lives, the struggle of surviving in a system that often ignores them, and how they've been judged by people like her. They speak of dreams deferred, and the toll it takes on good people to simply exist in a world that's stacked against them. Elijah talks about his hopes for a better future, how he wants to help his mother and make something of himself. But there's always the weight of injustice and hardship on his shoulders. His words aren't filled with bitterness, but with a quiet understanding of the uphill battle he faces. Rebecca listens intently, her heart heavy with the weight of the stories she's hearing. As she reflects on the harshness of her decisions in court, she feels a deep conflict stirring inside her. For the first time, she wonders if the lives she had judged so harshly were the result of circumstances beyond their control. Had she, in her pursuit of justice, truly understood the struggles of the people she sentenced? The realization hits her like a wave. Her worldview, shaped by years of legal decision-making, begins to crack. She wonders how she could have been so blind to the injustices that her own decisions might have perpetuated. As the night goes on, Rebecca's heart opens to the possibility that her life and her approach to justice might need to change. And it all began with Elijah's simple act of kindness, a boy who, despite his own struggles, did the right thing when it mattered most. The morning after Elijah's heroic rescue, he wakes up to a knot in his stomach, the consequences of the previous night weighing heavily on him. As he walks to the kitchen to help his mother, Nana Ruth, prepare breakfast, the phone rings. It's a call that turns his world upside down. The voice on the other end is stern and official. "Is this Elijah Robinson?" the officer on the line asks. "Yes, it is. Who is this?" Elijah responds nervously, not sure what's happening. "You are requested to appear in court immediately. You are facing charges of kidnapping and assaulting Judge Rebecca Whitmore. You're to come down to the courthouse now." Elijah's heart races. He feels a wave of confusion and fear flood his body. Kidnapping? Assault? The words don't make sense to him. He saved Judge Whitmore's life. He thought everything was over, that she was safe. But now, in the cruelest twist of fate, he finds himself accused of the very thing he was trying to prevent. Before he can even process what's happening, his mother, Nana Ruth, enters the room, already aware of the situation. She grabs his hand tightly, her eyes filled with concern and anger. They have no choice but to go, though fear and uncertainty cloud their every step. The courtroom is packed, the air thick with anticipation. People are murmuring, and cameras flash as Elijah is escorted to the front. Everyone looks at him, some with suspicion, others with disdain, judging him simply by his appearance. The idea that this young boy, in ragged clothes and from a poor neighborhood, could have hurt someone as important as a judge seems too incredible for anyone to believe. The prosecutor stands, pointing at Elijah with accusation, stating, "This boy illegally detained Judge Rebecca Whitmore, a respected member of the judiciary, in his home. He not only assaulted her, but kept her against her will." The words feel like a slap in Elijah's face, a stark contrast to the truth he lived. A boy helping a woman in need, not hurting her. Elijah's mind races as he stands there, facing the entire room. His thoughts are a blur of panic and disbelief. His mother pleads with the court for justice, crying out for them to understand what really happened. She tells them how her son saved the judge from harm, how he cared for her in his own home. She insists that they cannot judge him based on where he's from or what he looks like. But despite her pleas, the courtroom seems to favor the narrative that Elijah's actions were malicious. The media is already running with the story, focusing on the supposed dangerous circumstances Elijah allegedly put the judge in, rather than the truth. As the prosecutor continues to push for a harsh sentence, the air in the room grows even thicker with tension. The courtroom waits for Judge Whitmore to speak, to either confirm the charges or clear Elijah of any wrongdoing. The thought of her harsh judgments hangs heavy in the air, and everyone anticipates that, knowing her history, she will rule against him. Elijah, despite the gravity of the situation, remains silent, his heart pounding in his chest. He doesn't know what to say. His bravery, his desire to help, seems so small in this overwhelming room of authority. He stands there, not wanting to disappoint his mother or himself, waiting for the inevitable. Nana Ruth can't hold back her tears. "Please, don't do this to my son. He saved her life," she cries out, her voice shaking with emotion. The prosecutor dismisses her pleas as the focus is solely on Elijah's supposed crime. The audience, the jury, the courtroom, all eyes are on him, and no one knows what to think. The tension in the room builds, a heavy silence hanging over them all. The courtroom was hushed as everyone waited for Judge Rebecca Whitmore to speak. Her eyes were fixed on Elijah, who stood silently, his hands trembling slightly. The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time in his life, Elijah didn't know what would come next. Would the judge, the same woman who had sentenced so many like him to harsh fates, deliver the same kind of verdict he'd grown used to hearing for kids from neighborhoods like his? Would she see him as another statistic, another failure of the system she had upheld for so long? Or would she, just once, see him for who he really was? Judge Whitmore stood slowly, her posture straightening as she faced the crowd. There was a long, pregnant silence, and then her voice broke through it. "I was wrong," she began, and the room fell even quieter. Elijah's eyes widened. The words were so unexpected, so foreign, coming from her. "I've made judgments throughout my career that I now see were based on the very biases I've always tried to deny. I've sentenced young people, like Elijah, to prison or harsh punishment without truly seeing who they were, what they had been through, or what potential they held." The weight of her words hung in the air. Elijah didn't move. He could barely breathe as her admission echoed around the room. People shifted in their seats, murmurs running through the crowd as they processed what they were hearing. I saw their backgrounds, their circumstances, and assumed the worst. She continued, her gaze never leaving Elijah. And I was wrong. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that few in the room were prepared to feel. Elijah stood frozen, unable to comprehend the gravity of what was happening. He was staring at the woman who had once been the source of his fear, the woman who had wielded so much power over his life. And now she was admitting, in front of everyone, that she had been wrong. Judge Whitmore's voice remained steady as she addressed Elijah directly, her tone softening. "This young boy, Elijah, has done more good in one act of courage than many people in this courtroom will ever accomplish in their entire lives. He saved my life. He treated me with more kindness than I had ever experienced from anyone. And he did it without expecting anything in return." She paused, her gaze momentarily faltering, as if she was wrestling with the enormity of her own reflection. And yet I, someone who is supposed to uphold justice, have treated people like him as if they were disposable, just because of where they come from. There was another long silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of people in the room, shifting in their seats, trying to absorb the weight of her words. Elijah's heart beat erratically in his chest. He wasn't sure what to feel. This wasn't the Judge Rebecca Whitmore he had come to know. This wasn't the woman who had handed down harsh sentences to kids who looked like him. This was someone different, someone who was finally looking at him with a new understanding. Judge Whitmore continued, her voice now firm and filled with resolve. "I've learned something today. Elijah, you've taught me that it's not enough to simply uphold the law. We need to look beyond the surface, to see the truth in people, to understand their struggles and their humanity." Her eyes softened again as she looked at him, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. "I'm not going to punish this young man," she said decisively, her words reverberating in the air. "Instead, I'm going to make things right. I'm going to use my position to do something meaningful." She turned to face the courtroom, her voice unwavering. "I am launching a justice reform program, a program designed to support underprivileged youth, to give them the resources and opportunities they need to succeed. Elijah will be the first to benefit from this program." The room erupted into applause. For the first time in Elijah's life, he felt seen, truly seen. This wasn't just about a legal decision. This was a moment of transformation, both for him and for the woman who had once been a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in his life. The crowd, the media, and everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something monumental. Judge Whitmore wasn't finished. "And, Elijah, I'm offering you a scholarship," she said, turning to him. "A full scholarship to attend a school where you can receive the education you deserve. I want to help you escape the life you were born into, and I want to help your family. No one should have to live in poverty, struggling day by day just to survive." Elijah blinked, his mind racing. This was too much. It didn't seem real. The woman who had sentenced kids like him to prison was now offering him a chance at a future, offering him a way out of everything he had known. Elijah opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He was overwhelmed, his heart filled with gratitude, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of hope. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. The courtroom continued to applaud, the noise swelling around him, but it felt distant, like everything had gone quiet except for his own thoughts. The applause grew louder. The crowd wasn't just applauding the decision. They were applauding the change that had just occurred, the change that had been sparked by one boy's act of bravery. The courtroom was filled with people who had been blind to the injustices that had permeated the system, but now they were witnessing a moment that might change everything. The story of Judge Whitmore's redemption and the boy who had changed her was one that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. It was a story of transformation, of humanity, and of the power of second chances. As Elijah left the courtroom, his heart full of gratitude and hope for the future, he knew that his life would never be the same. He had not only saved a life, but had sparked a change that would reverberate through the very system that had once oppressed him. And for the first time, Elijah felt truly free, standing on the threshold of a future filled with possibility. Elijah walked into the new school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, a sense of pride filling his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The halls, once intimidating, now seemed full of promise. He was greeted by new faces, some of them curious, some just as excited as he was about the start of something fresh. The walls no longer felt like a barrier. They felt like the beginning of a journey, one he could now navigate with purpose. As Elijah settled into his new life, he couldn't help but think back to the night when everything had changed. That night, when his decision to help someone in need, someone who had once been a symbol of everything that was wrong in his life, turned the tide. He had saved a life, but in doing so, he had changed the course of his own. Judge Rebecca, once an authority figure who had been the source of his fear, had now become someone he trusted. The friendship they had formed, a bond based on mutual respect and understanding, was one of the most unexpected gifts of all. She had seen the potential in him, where others had only seen his circumstances. Her help, the scholarship, and the promise of a better future for him and his family had given him something he thought was impossible: hope. It wasn't just about the chance to escape poverty or to attend a good school. It was about what those opportunities meant. They were not just tickets to a better life. They were symbols of the belief that he mattered, that he could do something meaningful in this world. Judge Rebecca had made a vow to work with his mother to help struggling families, and together they had formed a small but powerful team, determined to give back to the community that had shaped them. They had made plans to build programs for children, provide scholarships, and offer support to those stuck in the same cycle Elijah had been trapped in for years. One afternoon, after school, Elijah sat with Judge Rebecca in her office. It had become a familiar routine. She looked at him, a warm smile spreading across her face, as she spoke words that still made his heart swell with emotion. "You saved more than just my life that night, Elijah," she said, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of gratitude. "You saved my soul." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat. He had never expected anything like this, a woman who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, to now speak to him like that. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a reminder of the profound impact one simple act of kindness had, and not just on one person, but on an entire system. As the months passed, Elijah worked hard in school, earning praise for his determination and intelligence. His grades improved, and he began to realize that his dreams weren't as far out of reach as they once seemed. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day, to fight for justice, to help people who had been neglected by the system, just as he once had been. The story of Elijah's courage and Judge Rebecca's transformation spread. Their journey together became a symbol of change, a story of how a single act of kindness could bring down walls that had been built over years of prejudice. In the final scene, Elijah stood outside the courthouse, his gaze fixed on the sky. The clouds were parting, allowing beams of sunlight to stream through. For the first time, the future seemed bright. He was no longer just a boy from a broken neighborhood. He was a boy with a future, with a purpose. And in that moment, he knew that the story of his life was just beginning. As he took a deep breath, Elijah smiled. The world was full of possibilities now, and he was ready to chase them.